Welcome to the TechLink Health Podcast, an on-demand source for the top trending healthcare topics and insights. Delivered by key opinion and emerging leaders and as featured on the TechLink Health app. The healthcare industry is rapidly evolving, so our goal is to connect listeners to the most relevant insights, ranging from digital health to financial well-being to interesting side gigs. For more details, visit www.techlink.health.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the TechLink Health Podcast. I'm Dr. Payal Kohli. I'm an associate adjunct professor in the cardiology division at Duke University and founder and medical director of Cherry Creek Heart, non-invasive and preventive cardiology practice in Denver, Colorado. Now, in the past on this podcast, we've talked about a range of health tech and medical devices that are really working on leveraging next generation technologies to try to improve health outcomes. Now, these devices include those that are focused on helping our areas of practice. Of course, as a cardiologist, I'm very familiar with the heart health devices. There's also neurotechnology, and then there's deep technology such as AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. But one of the core challenges in scaling these technologies is really related to how do we adopt them and how do we discover them or figure them out in our practice. So one of the ways to solve for these challenges is through immersive experiences. And what I love here is the gamification of health technology solutions. So we're really entering an era where augmented reality, virtual reality, mixed reality, these are becoming increasingly viable solutions for the growing metaverse in healthcare. And this is expected to reach over $80 billion by 2032. So if you're not ready for it, you better get ready for it because it certainly is coming. So in today's episode, we're talking about all of this and much, much more as we dig deep into the evolving space of neurotechnology. And I was fascinated to see this myself. And I'm delighted to welcome our guest today. So the guest we have today is Martin Permines, an internationally experienced executive across multiple disciplines in both the corporate and the startup environment. He is a board advisor and the chief financial officer for Torque3. Now, Torque3, as you may know, is a US-based virtual reality and robotics startup company with the ambition of really disrupting that neuro-rehabilitation market and improving the lives of the 101 million stroke survivors worldwide. Now, this is near and dear to my heart because one of the things that my patients tell me every single day is that their most feared outcome is to have a stroke. And yet we have patients that experience these strokes every day. And so having this type of technology to help them with their recovery and their rehabilitation is really, really impactful. And Torque3 works to help stroke survivors significantly improve their recovery outcomes by combining deeply immersive simulation and advanced robotics to help their brain sort of remake those connections and create these new neural pathways. So Martin's professional mission, which, I'm really a huge fan of, is to continue to support businesses and to essentially be a commercial and entrepreneurial change agent to help drive growth, transformation, and innovation so we can really bring this technology to the bedside for our patients. So it goes without saying that Martin has a passion for growth, transformation, and innovation within this space. And we look forward to getting his perspectives on the podcast. So I've talked enough. So now, without further delay, I'm really excited to welcome Martin to the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Pyle, wonderful to meet you. Wonderful to be here and looking forward to a great conversation on some of my favorite subjects.
As am I. So, Martin, I want to start by giving our listeners a little bit of background. So, can you tell me a little bit more about yourself and also about your journey into the neurotechnology space? How did you get interested in this? And how did you think about a solution like this?
Right. No, sure, Pyle. I'd be delighted to. My name's Martin Permines, and as you can detect, I'm a Brit. I trained as an accountant, but found accounting and audit not really holding my attention. I moved into industry where I could influence business performance and not merely stand on the sidelines and record what was happening. So I started my career in industry in telecoms, working for the newly privatized British Telecom, that dates me a little bit, and supported their non-core businesses such as IT, systems integration, video on demand, pay TV. And from there, I moved into the startup world as CFO for a struggling messaging company. I progressed to being a joint CEO, and there's a story behind that, which I can relay one day, and was tasked by the lead investor in getting the company ready for sale. The good news, bad news, you've got the job, but now we're going to sell the company. So within 6 months, managed to turn around the company to profit and sold it at a premium to a competitor.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you. That was great fun. One of the things I learned, Kyle, was the importance of understanding your customers and how profitable they were. And this company had hundreds of customers, but only a fraction actually contributed to the bottom line. So big lesson for me was sometimes volume doesn't make a good company. And after the sale of the company, I found myself working for another telco where I learned a ton of stuff, which I won't go into too much detail. It was all about strategic sourcing and managing partners, and also international business. I spent time in the Middle East, Asia, Europe, and also the San Francisco Bay Area. And then I spent three years freelancing, working for companies, improving their performance through supplier relationship management. And then in the noughties, I got married, moved to Los Angeles, where my wife lived. And then within 6 months of moving to the States, I was offered and accepted another CE role. This time it was in London. So, bit of a difficult conversation, but my wife was hugely supportive with me moving back to London. And because she was a college professor, she had huge flexibility to join me for great lengths of time. So with the luxury of intercontinental living for a while, with homes both in London and LA. Now, it was during one of her long stopovers in London that my journey into neuro-rehab began. It started on the morning of the 26th of June, 2012, when completely out of the blue, she suffered a massive stroke.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, a huge shock, as she had no other warnings about it. And that's when I got exposed to the limitations of traditional stroke therapy, the whole concept of plateauing, and in my mind, the complete lack of understanding of this concept called neuroplasticity among stroke therapy practitioners. So I set myself out on a quest to try and do everything to help my wife's recovery. I quit work for 4 years to take care of my wife because she had other health complications too. And then when she was well enough, I landed a role in a corporate VC and used this privileged position to scout for neuro-tech solutions to help my wife. Then one day back in 2019, October, I believe, I was introduced to Talk3's brilliant founder, a guy called David Elsie, who gave me a demo. And you know what, Pyle? From that moment on, I knew this platform would be a game changer, not just for my wife, but for stroke rehab in general. And that's when I decided to help Talk3 in any way I could to get their marvelous machine to see the light of day.
Well, I want to thank you for sharing your story about your wife. Clearly something deeply personal, but also highlight the impact of cardiovascular disease in women, which we often forget about. And stroke at a young age can be certainly very debilitating. So it sounds like you took lemons and made lemonade out of it. And I'm happy to hear that that tragic story led to this. But I want to talk a little bit more about the technology and the whole neuro rehabilitation space in general, and then really talk more about the value proposition. How did you take the problem that your wife's stroke presented you with and turn it into a solution? And, it's such an exciting time in the neurotechnology space right now because there's so much of this brain computer interface. We've seen computer chips being implanted in patients. We've seen all sorts of things that might lead to people having a completely different quality of life than what they had just a decade ago. So help us connect the dots. What's going on in this space and how will some of this technology continue to evolve?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. I mean, I find this is a massive area full of great developments. In my mind, the sort of neuro rehab space could be divided into two categories: technology that is aimed at the brain itself and actually improving the brain. And second category is technology that's really aimed at therapy. So in the first category, which actually to me looked very helpful, but my only experience was in the research setting, and I didn't really see any significant benefits from this technology. Maybe it's just a bit too early. Another sort of type of technology in this category is like photo biomodulation. Devices using LEDs or laser, red or near infrared frequencies. And I find that these were actually really valuable for pain and inflammation. To have direct experience of Vilight's products, the Canadian company, and It really helped with improving mental clarity. I'd say that the benefits are not transformational, but there are no side effects. And the price point is highly affordable. So it's one of the key sort of things I would sort of highlight and recommend. In addition to those sorts of devices, there's these sound-based devices that appear to help very much with stress and sleep and cognitive performance. But I've not really seen them benefit sort of neurological conditions, things like stroke impairment. Turning to the second category of neuro-tech, I mean, there's so many devices now out there for neurological impairments such as stroke. The approaches being used, including VR, games, gamification, they're all built on really good research. And all this research is relatively new. So a lot of people in the medical industry are not really familiar with these developments. I was speaking with somebody earlier around how, like, say, pharmaceutical companies constantly provide education, stroke promotion to doctors about the latest and greatest products that they have. There's no real equivalent of that in neurotech. So I think there's a gap in the market for that type of communication of what's going on. I have tried a number of these types of products and found them useful, but also I found after an initial period, they really didn't deliver any significant benefits. And the problems related to a number of sort of areas. One was very often they were fiddly to use. And I don't know whether you've come across exoskeleton devices. They actually help you sort of walk and provide you assistance. And great for gait training. And again, went into that quite deeply with my wife, and they had wonderful promise. But the setup time and the constant adjustment meant that they were highly frustrating to use. So loads of theoretical potential, but in practice, just didn't deliver. And, maybe the technology will improve, but that technology at the moment is just not there. Another common problem with neurotech therapy devices is that they don't hold the patient's long-term attention. I've tried numerous devices, and there's typically like a sort of honeymoon period, and you get a high use rates, which is absolutely important for, say, stroke rehab. But after a few weeks, the patient gets bored. There's not enough stimulation. It's the same old, same old. They're not engaged. And when they get bored, they're not motivated. So they don't use it. So it's not effective. So that's really, the two big problems I found. Now, one of the things I want to get to now is sort of dig into talk 3 a bit, if I may, Kyle. So you did a great description of the product, but let me just do a quick sort of pin picture of what the talk 3 rehab system looks like. Imagine you've got the hardware, which is a seat, pedals, and a steering arrangement, which is all mounted on a motion simulator, like a motion simulator that you get in aircraft simulators. And then the patient uses a VR headset and travels around a metaverse, which consists of different trails on a virtual quad bike. And they have to work their upper body and lower body, upper body to steer and lower body to propel themselves. And they have to exercise their brains to navigate the environment and solve puzzles. And the way the trails are designed creates a sense of risk for the patient. So they actually feel quite like stimulated by it. Now, what makes Talk 3 a game changer is it's managed to take multiple technologies and integrate them into a single coherent system that stroke patients can physically access and really enjoy using, and also can use for an extended amount of time. And that really solves two of the biggest challenges that I see in stroke therapy. The first challenge is motivation. After a while, it's hard to find the motivation. In my view, they incur the spiral of despair. And Paul, you'll know this. The patient has the stroke. It's all desperate. Everybody's full of worry. Will they survive? Won't they survive? And then when they start to make a recovery, as the brain starts to restore itself and the inflammation dies down, you can see them really, really getting a lot of their previous abilities back. And then they kind of hit a wall. And some of that wall is artificially imposed because they kind of run out of therapy, right? Or if they haven't run out of therapy, the therapy isn't engaging enough or effective enough. So they stop progressing and they do plateau. And then they start to get depressed. They start to feel their pain. They start to feel their spasticity. Their cardiovascular fitness goes through the floor and they just like start to go down. And if they are severely impaired, the family caregiver is also on that downward spiral because their loved one is no longer progress, right? They're incurring bills because they've lost a job, they've lost an income. They've possibly even got a caregiver that they have to pay for. So, you get to this cycle of despair. And, the last thing you really think about is going out of the house to yet another ineffective stroke therapy session. And that's one of the biggest challenges in my mind in stroke therapy is motivation to get on with the therapy. Now, the big thing about Talk 3 is it makes therapy fun. And I'm not saying this because I'm so close to them. The test patients that have used the machine have reported, and their loved ones have reported, that the therapy session or Talk 3 is the highlight of their day.
I'm curious if you tried it on your wife, Martin, and what has your experience and her experience been?
Right. Well, I have, and the experience has been fantastic. She's actually just 12 weeks into a case study working in conjunction with a wonderful research organization called Casa Colina Research Institute out here in California. And her highlight of the day is getting on that machine. And because the machine is local, she's actually wanting to do therapy more than once a day. And she's just delighted and she's engaged. And she's a very, very hard judge of everything. And she's that doesn't sort of like take to things. And I've tried so many things in the past that she's just refuses to use. But with the Talk 3 platform, just the way it engages her, you can just see sort of her sense of wonderment and excitement as she's crashing around these beautifully crafted landscapes in the metaverse. And without realizing it, performing a ton of therapy. One of the things that I can sort of point out as sort of like a data point, this is coming to the volume of therapy, not just the frequency. She used to do therapy on a recumbent exercise bike. And she found it difficult because of pain and being out of condition to do more than 5 minutes on an exercise bike. She is regularly doing more than 45 minutes per session.
Wow. And I mean, that's really fascinating because I see this with cardiology patients too after they've had heart surgery. And, as you're talking, I'm even thinking of all the other potential applications, not just stroke rehab, but other neurological conditions. Obviously, there may be even mental health and substance use conditions where you can use these types of technologies to essentially sort of reprogram your brain and reprogram those reward circuits. And what you said, which I really want to highlight, is that we're more likely to do something that we enjoy doing. That's how human beings are, whether they've had a stroke or not. So to create an intervention that has therapeutic benefit that can also give a sense of satisfaction, reward, or engagement, I think that really is the best of both worlds.
Right. Totally agree. I think making stroke therapy like it's not, or any therapy like it's not therapy, it's like something you want to do in its own right. I think that's the key aspect of a successful therapy. There's one other sort of dimension of Talk 3 that I just wanted to share. In addition to the twin challenges of, motivation, frequency, and length and duration of the exercise, and that is to do with neuroplasticity. And one of the big things about the Talk 3 platform is it uses all of these multiple components to produce a really deep sense of immersion. It's not just VR, you put your VR headset on and you're in a different world. No, with Talk 3, you feel the motion sim actually stimulates G forces. So as you speed, you can feel yourself accelerating. You can feel the bumps on the trail.
Wow. Well, so tell me, is it personalized to an individual? For example, their weight, their height, the shape of their body. I mean, how does it know? Are there sensors placed on the person? Talk to me a little bit more about that.
Right. Yeah. So the machine is highly adjustable in terms of the actual how you position the legs, the arms, also caters to the length of the trunk, the width of the shoulders. But physically, it's tailored. So you have to set the machine up physically to every patient. There's also limitation. The machine kind of knows what to do with a certain weight. So it's as long as you're within certain parameters, the machine will perform fine. If you are in excess of a certain weight, then what will happen is that the machine starts to slow a tiny bit. Slowing down breaks the bubble, breaks the illusion of being in this virtual world, because now your brain is sensing, oh, I should have bumped a little bit or moved a little bit earlier. So this is the trick is the machine moves almost in real time. And that's part of the secret of neuroplasticity or the illusion of deep immersion. The machine's actually got two air blowers, one on your face and one on your body. And they're linked to how fast you're going. So as you accelerate down a hill, the wind, you can feel the wind rushing across your face and across your body. And when you stop, the wind stops. So it's those things, plus it's got 3D sound. So you can hear when you're going through the jungle trail, little creatures, leaves rustling and stuff like that. So you literally feel like you're there. So we believe that the deep immersion does something, and I call it turbocharging neuroplasticity. Something special happens. And I don't think there's really a lot of research on this, but something weird happens. For instance, the patients that have used the machine are getting incredible gains despite being plateaued for years in incredibly short periods of time. And we don't understand it, but wow, they should be a little bit better, but not a lot better. So maybe later on, maybe come on to some examples of how those patients did in terms of their sort of degree of recovery they made. But I believe part of the question you asked me earlier was about brain computer interfaces. So I'm no expert. It's something I have looked at. And again, there's obviously the invasive ones like the Neuralink and the non-invasive ones that just sit adjacent to the brain. And I don't know about you, I think there's a lot of potential. I'm a big fan of trying the non-invasive ones. To me, the sort of research isn't quite there to justify the risk of entering someone's skull with literally a device and the problems that may lead to. I mean, as a doctor, I guess you must be thinking,
No, I sort of agree with you, Martin. I think the non-invasive's a great way to start. And as you're talking, I'm sort of thinking of a fusion of The Matrix and Avatar, those two movies sort of together, and in this person's brain to enhance their neural plasticity. But I want to know, as a doctor, as a clinician at the bedside, if I'm taking care of a stroke patient, do I dial in a prescription into this technology? Does it automatically sort of iterate onto that if the patient is doing better than expected? I've sort of read as well that you collect over 20 million data points. So what does that information tell us, and how do we use that information to enhance the patient's recovery?
Right. So I think a lot of that is still a little way in the future for Talk 3. There are lots of sensors and lots of information collected on the machine. Today, we don't use the 20 million points of data from every session, but we have metrics. So the machine produces metrics on a session. For instance, it'll say how far a patient has traveled. So in terms of miles traveled or miles cycled, how long they've been cycling, how fast did they get to. So nice basic data, but not medical data by any means. Then there is a module where patients can be evaluated. The classic PT eval every few weeks. In order to continue with their insurance, they have to have a PT do an assessment. Well, the machine can do that. It has a program which takes patients through a sequence of exercises and using the sensors on the foot pedals, right and left, and the steering levers, right and left, pulling up and down. It actually does an assessment of how much torque the patient's exerting into the machine, and get a nice little report which is objective, and this acts as a baseline from which you can actually compare patients' improvements.
I mean, I can see that really being applied in the inpatient setting too. Someone comes in with a stroke, and I remember during my residency, there was a patient, we waited like a whole day because it was a Sunday and the physical therapist couldn't come and evaluate the patient. So we essentially kept them another day just to figure out where they needed to go and, what the recovery looked like. But with this type of a technology, certainly nice to have an objective baseline and also nice to have it at your convenience, readily available. And you can compare across different individuals as well. So it really does help to collect data to inform future decisions.
Right, totally. We haven't marketed it as such yet, but one of the use cases for the machine is purely to do evals, objective evals. Put it in the corner of the clinic, get the patients to sit on the machine, and it literally, Kyle, it takes 5-10 minutes. When my wife gets her evals, they take about 45 minutes, and it's actually it's a whole therapy session gone, almost wasted. She's not actually being made to exercise and improve. So that we think that's going to be a really a useful feature. The third thing, which really comes into how we propose to use the 20 million points of data. So all of the patient data, anonymized data, will be downloaded into a big data lake, data set, call it what you like. And what we plan to do is, can I use the two letters AI to actually analyze this data and figure out, like based on the type of impairment and the degree of impairment and the exercises that patient did and how they progressed, to fine tune and develop different therapy regimes. What we learned is that different severities of stroke patients require different types of approaches on the machine. So we tested a whole cohort of what I call moderately to mildly impaired stroke survivors last year. And the sequence of sort of exercises that they did not apply to somebody with a severe stroke, i.e. my wife. We had to do something completely different, but we had to do it on the hoof. We weren't following a roadmap. So there's a lot of trial and error. Now, obviously, when we get the data and the data sets, everybody else following will benefit from that trial and error. And so we'll get better and better outcomes with patients improving faster and better, right? So that's our plan. And that's really what we're going to do with the data sets.
Well, I'm excited to see that down the pipeline because I do think it'll offer us some really interesting insights. But you talked about such fascinating applications of this technology and their impact on patient recovery. I want to spend a moment talking about cost. It's our least favorite thing to talk about in medicine, but one of the most, common things and questions that come up. And we know that technologies can be expensive, especially technology like the one you're describing, which is personalized. It's a large machine. You have to sit in it. So, given your role as the CFO, talk to me a little bit more about your broader commercial strategy. How do you think this is going to get to the bedside, to the clinicians, to the patients? And, what can we do to improve patient access to these types of technology?
Right. Yeah. Another great question. And let me answer this in one way where, despite being in the role of a CFO, I'm not worried about cost in this instance because cost really doesn't come into it when you've got so much value you're bringing to patient outcomes. Let me illustrate. If you can take a patient who's lost their independence because of they've plateaued and they're not getting effective treatment, and you can take them from being plateaued to actually having some form of improved recovery. Possibly, if they're mildly impaired, they go back to work. Or if they're moderately impaired, they perhaps work part-time. Or, the caregiver requirement. You've got a severely impaired stroke patient. You may need 24/7 home care, right? That's a lot of money. I mean, it's 3 people you're employing, possibly 4 people, 24/7, 168 hours a week. That's a ton of money. In California minimum wage, you could do the math, right? You may find that, say, perhaps they only need part of that care. Perhaps their caregiver requirements reduced by 50%. So they're having 12 hours a day care rather than 24. Suddenly you've saved yourself probably $100,000 per year on care costs.
I mean, I think you're right. We're missing the forest for the trees. We get so fixated on the cost today that we forget about the future costs and the healthcare costs in general to the entire system.
Yeah. And also you've got the quality of life pile, right? If you got like one of the patients in our first cohort of testing, his wife accompanied him to all the therapies. And when she started, before we actually engaged in therapy, she reported that she'd lost her husband. The kids had lost their dad. And when he had finished, he actually had 2 dollops of therapy. He came back for more. He was part of the first cohort and the second cohort. And he just became alive. He was previously withdrawn, was sedentary all day, kind of sat in the chair, didn't do much, depressed and unable to connect. And within, the the few weeks he had therapy, he was transformed. He's able to speak in sentences, engage his family, engage his wife, go on vacation. These are life-changing things for a family.
In medicine, we talk about quality adjusted life years gain. But I think to your point, Martin, this is priceless. I mean, these types of endpoints where you can transform somebody's quality of life to this extent, it's incredible. And, obviously we didn't go into medicine because of the dollar signs anymore. We would have done something else. But I feel like the satisfaction and the engagement that you can get from changing somebody's life in such a profound way, it surpasses everything. It makes all the long hours and the burnout and the long days all worthwhile.
Totally. And just for us to see this happening with the limited number of patients is so uplifting for us and the team. One of the questions, Paul, you asked about is how people can access the machine, and that's something we're working hard on. I mean, the company's still quite early on in terms of its development. The long-term goal of the company is to make the technology available to everybody who needs it. That's really the mission of the company. Because the vast majority of stroke survivors have been written off, they've plateaued. And as you know, as a doctor, once you plateau, you will not get therapy. There's 8 million stroke survivors in the US. 90% of them are not getting therapy. And so they're written off. We want our device, our machine, to be basically FDA approved for the treatment of plateaued stroke. And you're probably thinking, whoa, that's a big ask. And it is. And it's going to take us a lot of effort, a lot of money, and a lot of time to get there. But that's what we want. We'd like people to just be able to sort of get their therapy and get up to the optimum position they can be put in by using the machine and not having to pay, apart from using insurance for it. However, where are we in the meantime? We need to sort of think about how to move forward. So we are planning to create a pilot center in Utah where we're going to outfit a center with a number of machines and get patients to basically use the machine on a sort of per session basis. Now, they'll have to use it on a cash pay. So obviously restricts it for a lot of people. But we want to really demonstrate that the machine is economically viable to get the right level of investor interest. Someone's got to pay for all of this, right? So we want to be able to prove a couple of things. One is how much customers or patients will pay and how much revenue per customer will make. They're the two key things. That's the pilot. In addition to the pilot, we're working with a couple of health providers that are looking to deploy our technology. These are early adopter health providers, the ones that are kind of switched on and doing things perhaps for their patient community good, not just purely for mercenary purposes. And they were looking at deploying machines with those, partly to build the brand and build up the data set of the machine and its effectiveness. And I think maybe we may actually want to provide machines to perhaps providers at some point going forward. And what we'll do is probably provide these machines as what I call platform as a service. So the company will keep ownership of the machines and make them available, situate them in clinics and health systems, and we'll charge like a monthly fee and give uptime. So you have like 8 hours a day availability to use this machine. Then the beauty of that kind of approach gives us the control over the quality of the machine and what it's doing. And secondly, it allows us to continue to network all that data and gather that data with our to-be AI solution so we can refine the actual treatment therapies. That's how we plan to go to market. Beyond that, I think if we're successful, one option is for us to basically create a whole bunch of flagship centers across the US and perhaps just sort of cookie cutter the approach from our pilot center. That is an approach. Another thing that we're looking at is the international market, because there are 8 million stroke survivors in the US, there are 100 million globally. And how do we get to them? And what we're looking at is probably not trying to physically deploy the technology ourselves, because it would just take too long. So we want to enter into sort of arrangements with international partners so they can actually license our technology and deploy it as soon as possible in the countries in which they operate.
Well, I really enjoyed hearing about the technology and also hearing about its potential launch and how I might be able to start using it in my patients. So, in closing, Martin, I want you to look ahead a little bit and talk about kind of the future, what we're missing, what we're hoping for, what our hopes and dreams are, and also leave our listeners with some resources. Where can they go to learn more about neurotechnology in general, to learn more about your technology, and just to learn more about stroke recovery?
Right. Well, what a great set of questions. I think in terms of finding out more about Talk 3, I mean, hit me up. I'm sure we could put my contact details in the podcast notes. Also, I'd like to put some video material to provide more information to the listeners and viewers about Talk 3. In terms of I'd say, where are my go-to sources of information for all things stroke neurotech? You know what? There's an old book by a guy called Norman Doig. I don't know if you've heard of it. Forget the title. It's Doige, and it's one of the first books on neuroplasticity. And it's a great, basic sort of asset to just get your head around neuroplasticity and the wonders of it. My other go-to source of information, and it's going to sound really boring, is PubMed, right? That there is no better source of information in my mind. You can read journals and stuff like that. I constantly cruise through PubMed. You just put in the search terms, neurotechnology, stroke, neuro-rehab, and there's a ton of stuff constantly sort of coming up. Of course, you have to have a bit of time to read them, but as a quick tip to the people who are not used to PubMed, read the abstracts for now. That's probably enough.
Is it ironic if I use Chat GPT and AI to search PubMed about AI? Is that ironic?
It is, but it's highly useful. I am now actually using ChatGPT.
Me too. I'm using it for all sorts of things. That's why I brought it up, because it's a little ironic because we're talking about AI and technology.
Absolutely. It's amazing. I'm actually using ChatGPT to analyze my wife's radiology reports.
Oh, wow. How interesting. Yeah. Very, very nice.
It saves a hell of a lot of time and being sort of fretful and nervous about not being able to understand stuff. So really, that's really, I think, my tips for, information. I hope that's answered your question, Pyle.
It did. Martin, I want to thank you so much for such an interesting conversation, taking us through the technology and really for addressing this type of a problem head on, because it is a problem that needs a solution and we don't have a good solution for it. So I look forward to hearing more about your technology, the research that emerges from this, and hopefully being able to use it. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I want to thank our listeners for tuning in and joining us on this episode of the TechLink Health Podcast. Please tune in to our next episode, where we'll be sure to talk about interesting technology. Until next time, take care.
Thanks, Pyle.
Thanks for listening to this episode. TechLink Health is a healthcare advisory platform for consumers and organizations to stay informed with the latest insights while connecting with healthcare experts for telehealth, e-consults, and consulting services. For more details, visit www.techlink.health.